I shut off water to 43 lakefront homes with one switch. And for 6 straight days, those people learned real fast how fragile comfort actually is. Funny thing is, none of that would have happened if a woman named Diane Mercer had just left my firewood alone. But HOA people like Diane never really think they're stealing from you. They think they're correcting you. And that's a dangerous kind of person to live around, because they'll smile while they take something that mattered to you and still expect you to apologize for making a scene afterward. My name's Calvin Mercer. I'm 54 years old, retired diesel ship mechanic, and until last summer, I figured I'd already survived the hardest thing life could throw at me. Turns out grief changes the way you measure consequences. I live outside Traverse Bay, up in northern Michigan, in a cedar timber house my wife Elaine and I built ourselves back in the late 90s. Nothing fancy, just thick beams, old stone fireplace, screened porch facing the lake, and a dock that groans every time the wind shifts east. Elaine used to joke the place sounded alive at night. Cancer took her in February of 2024, pancreatic, quick and ugly. And after 30 years of marriage, the silence that settled into that house afterward felt heavier than concrete. People talk about loneliness like it's sadness, but it's not really. Sadness cries. Loneliness just sits there in the room with you while the coffee gets cold. So I kept myself busy. I split wood. Every morning, same routine, coffee before sunrise, radio humming old country songs, then out back with the maul and wedges. I had stacked almost 6 full cords of black cherry along the cedar fence behind my workshop, what I'd seasoned nearly 3 years because Elaine loved the smell of cherry smoke in winter. Said it made the whole house smell warm even before the fire caught. That would matter to me more than some people would understand. Now, when Elaine and I first moved out there, our shoreline road had maybe 7 houses total, mostly older folks who minded their business. Then developers got involved. Within 10 years, the place turned into one of those polished lake communities with matching mailboxes, outdoor kitchens no one cooks in, and HOA newsletters reminding grown adults what color flowers they're allowed to plant. I mostly kept to myself. Didn't attend meetings, didn't argue, didn't care. But people like Diane Mercer can't stand someone they can't control. Diane moved in from Naperville, Illinois, after her husband sold some medical supply company for more money than God intended one family to have. She became HOA president within 8 months and started treating the neighborhood like she'd been elected mayor of a tiny dictatorship. One month, she was measuring fence heights. Next month, she was fining people because garbage can stay visible too long after pickup day. She once threatened a retired teacher over wind chimes because they were creating an inconsistent sound environment. I swear to God she actually used those words. The first real issue between us happened over my dock. She came marching down there one afternoon in white capri pants and sunglasses big enough to block an eclipse, carrying a clipboard against her chest like a police badge. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "several residents have concerns your dock aesthetic doesn't align with the updated shoreline standards." I remember looking at her for a second thinking, "Lady, this dock survived storms before your Botox doctor graduated middle school." But I just shrugged and said, "Dock's older than your HOA." She didn't like that answer. From then on, every couple weeks, another notice. Fire pit too close to shoreline. Kayak rack visible from road. Excessive timber storage. The usual nonsense. Then came the woodpile. It was a Thursday morning in June, cool breeze off the lake, and I found a laminated violation notice zip-tied to my fence. Fire hazard. $600 penalty if not removed within 72 hours. I actually laughed when I read it because the stack sat nowhere near any structure and had been there for years. I figured I'd deal with it Monday after fishing with my buddy Ron over the weekend. But Saturday morning, I walked outside carrying coffee and nearly dropped the mug. The entire woodpile was gone. Every last split log. In its place sat fresh tire tracks and another notice saying the HOA had contracted emergency removal services due to noncompliance. They even added a $300 disposal fee. I just stood there staring at the empty patch beside the fence while wind moved through the trees behind me. 3 years seasoning that wood. 3 winters Elaine sitting by the fireplace telling me not to burn it too fast because she loved the smell. And some woman with a clipboard decided it was trash. That's the moment this whole thing started, though I didn't know it yet. Because later that same afternoon, angry and unable to sleep, I dug through an old filing cabinet in my basement looking for my property survey, and I found something Diane Mercer probably wished had stayed buried forever. The map was folded inside an old manila envelope from 1978, edges yellowed, corners soft from age, and at first I almost tossed it aside because I thought it was just utility paperwork from when the house was built. But then I noticed a blue line cutting across the bottom edge of my property toward the shoreline, and right beside it, stamped in faded county ink, were the words Private Water Access Easement. I sat down right there on the basement floor under the pole chain light and kept reading. Turns out back in the 70s, before the subdivision existed, the original landowner had installed a shared intake system pulling water from the bay through an underground pump station built entirely on what later became my parcel. Every house in the neighborhood depended on it now. Every sprinkler, every shower, every dishwasher cycle, every oversized lakefront kitchen with marble countertops and wine coolers. All of it depended on a squat little cinder block pump house sitting 50 yards behind my workshop. And according to the documents, the HOA only had access rights through a maintenance agreement that was never formally renewed after the original owner died. Which meant legally, things were murky. Very murky. I remember leaning back against a shelf full of old paint cans and laughing to myself, not because I planned revenge yet, but because for the first time in months I felt something besides grief. Purpose maybe, or anger with direction. I called my attorney Monday morning, an old guy named Walter Briggs who sounded permanently annoyed even when he was happy. I explained the situation and there was this long silence on the phone before he finally said, "Calvin, are you telling me they seized personal property while relying on infrastructure located entirely on your land?" I said, "That about sums it up." Another pause. Then he chuckled. "Well now, that's unfortunate for them." Over the next 2 days, Walter dug through county records while I kept quiet. Turns out the HOA had spent years assuming nobody would ever challenge the arrangement because previous owners never cared enough to look into it. The pump house technically belonged to the original utility cooperative, which dissolved decades earlier. No active service contract existed. No easement renewal. No liability insurance tied to current maintenance. And somehow, by sheer laziness and arrogance, the HOA board had allowed the entire neighborhood water system to sit in legal limbo while I maintained the structure voluntarily all these years without charging a dime. I replaced pressure valves myself, cleared winter freeze buildup myself, even repaired storm damage after a lightning strike 3 summers back. Diane probably didn't even know where the pump house was until she started this fight. Walter drafted a termination notice by Thursday. Real official-looking thing too, thick legal paper, certified mail, language cold enough to freeze lake water. Effective immediately, all voluntary maintenance access was revoked pending negotiation of a formal utility management agreement. HOA representatives would no longer enter my property without written authorization. Liability concerns. Property misuse. Unauthorized seizure of private assets. Walter loved phrases like that. I mailed copies to every board member. Then I waited. Friday evening around sunset, Diane came banging on my front door hard enough to rattle the stained glass Elaine installed beside the entryway. I opened it, and there she stood holding the paperwork in one hand and my violation notice in the other. "This is ridiculous," she snapped before I even said hello. "You cannot hold an entire neighborhood hostage over firewood." I remember glancing at the notice in her hand and saying, "Apparently people can remove property that doesn't belong to them though." Her jaw tightened. "Those logs violated community code." "Funny," I said, "because theft violates state law." She stepped closer then, lowering her voice the way people do when they think sounding calm makes them sound powerful. "Mr. Mercer, you are creating unnecessary conflict during an emotionally difficult period in your life, and I think everyone has been very patient with you since your wife passed." That sentence right there, that's the one that changed everything. Because suddenly this wasn't about Wood anymore. She thought grief made me manageable, weak, easier to push around. I smiled at her, first time all conversation. "You should head home, Diane." Then I closed the door. About an hour later, I grabbed my flashlight, walked down through the trees behind my workshop, and unlocked the pump house. The building looked exactly how it always had, faded blue cinder block walls, rust stains under the vents, old General Electric control box humming in the dark. I'd spent enough years in engine rooms to appreciate machinery. Systems tell the truth. People lie constantly, but systems don't. If something stops working, There's always a reason. I stood there listening to the low vibration from the pumps while lake water moved through the intake pipes beneath the floor. 43 homes pulling from the same line. Families making dinner, running laundry, watering lawns. Completely unaware, one stubborn old mechanic was standing beside the heartbeat of their entire neighborhood. I won't lie to you. Part of me hesitated. Elaine probably would have told me to let it go. She hated conflict. But then I remembered that empty patch beside my fence. I remembered Diane using my wife's death like leverage in a negotiation. And I remember thinking, no, people like that only stop when consequences finally become inconvenient. So I reached over and flipped the main breaker off. The hum vanished instantly. Dead silence. You ever shut down a giant engine after hours of noise? There's this strange pressure afterward, like the world itself pauses to notice something important just stopped moving. That's exactly what it felt like standing there in the dark. I locked the panel, chained the exterior gate, replaced the old padlock with a heavy commercial deadbolt, then zip-tied a private property. A no trespassing sign right across the handle before heading back toward the house. By the next morning, chaos had already started. At first it was subtle. Sprinkler systems froze mid-cycle. Kitchen faucets sputtered air. A couple residents assumed there'd been a water main break somewhere outside town. But around noon my phone started ringing nonstop. Unknown numbers mostly. I ignored every single one. Then Ron called, laughing so hard he could barely talk. Jesus Christ, Cal, he wheezed. You shut down the whole damn kingdom. Apparently residents were driving around searching for utility trucks that didn't exist. Diane posted in the HOA Facebook group claiming emergency crews were investigating a regional pressure failure. She still hadn't admitted the truth. Day 2 got uglier. Without steady water flow, septic systems started backing up across the lower shoreline homes. Toilets wouldn't flush right. Showers drained slow. People who spent $15,000 on patio furniture suddenly couldn't brush their teeth without bottled water. I sat on my porch that evening drinking beer while watching a husband and wife 2 houses down haul cases of Costco water into their garage like survivors preparing for nuclear winter. There was something darkly funny about it. I won't pretend otherwise. Then Diane showed up again. This time she didn't bother knocking politely. She stormed straight onto my porch while I was cleaning perch at the picnic table. Turn it back on, she barked. Now. I kept filleting fish without looking up. Evening, Diane. Don't play games with me. Not playing. She slammed a folder onto the table. You are exposing this community to liability beyond anything you understand. I finally looked at her then. Lady, I maintained your water system for free while your board fined me over stacked firewood. That wood was a safety hazard. No, I said quietly. It was personal. She stared at me for a second, maybe realizing too late she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. But pride's a dangerous thing. Instead of apologizing, she doubled down. If necessary, we'll sue you into bankruptcy. I wiped my hands on a rag, stood up slowly, and handed her a manila envelope Walter prepared earlier that afternoon. Inside was a formal utility management proposal. 10-year operational contract. Annual maintenance fee. Emergency service retainers. Liability coverage requirements. Access restrictions. Quarterly inspections. Full operational authority retained by me. At the bottom, highlighted in yellow, was the upfront payment requirement. $90,000. Diane actually laughed when she saw it. Not nervous laughter either, genuine disbelief. This is extortion. I shrugged. No, Diane. Extortion would and oppose. VE been charging double. Then I picked up the fish tray, walked inside, and shut the screen door in her face while she was still yelling from the porch. And that was the moment the neighborhood finally realized the water wasn't coming back anytime soon. By day 3, the whole subdivision started smelling wrong. Not strong at first, just this sour damp odor drifting through the warm June air whenever the wind pushed inland from the lower properties. Septic systems need water pressure to function properly, and once enough tanks started backing up, the entire shoreline turned into a slow-motion public health problem. Trash bags piled up beside garages because nobody wanted sewage inside the house. Windows stayed shut even in 85-degree heat. You could hear generators humming at night from people trying to keep air filtration systems running. One family checked into a hotel downtown after their downstairs bathroom flooded. Another guy tried sneaking around the tree line behind my workshop around midnight with bolt cutters, probably hoping he could access the pump house himself. I watched him from my porch swing with a flashlight across my lap until he gave up and left. Funny thing about wealthy neighborhoods, most people living there never imagine infrastructure can fail because usually someone else handles unpleasant reality for them. Diane stopped sounding angry after day 3. Angry people still think they're in control. By day 4 she sounded tired. She came back over around sunset wearing jeans and a sweatshirt instead of her usual country club armor. No clipboard, no sunglasses, just exhaustion written all over her face. I was sanding an old cedar chair in the garage when she walked up quietly and said, "Calvin, people are getting scared." I kept sanding for a second before shutting the machine off. Wasn't much fear when your contractors hauled away my property. She nodded slowly. I know. First honest thing I'd heard from her in months. She glanced toward the lake and said, "You know, when we moved here, everyone said you were difficult." I laughed a little. "No, Diane. I just don't like being managed." She rubbed her forehead. "The board's falling apart. Residents are threatening lawsuits. The county health department's involved now. Sounds expensive." "Please," she said quietly, and hearing that word from her honestly surprised me more than the water crisis itself. "Just tell me what fixes this." Now here's the thing nobody tells you about revenge. The moment the other person finally breaks, you expect satisfaction to hit like fireworks. But standing there looking at Diane, shoulders slumped, eyes tired, I mostly just felt empty. Because none of this brought Elaine back. The house was still quiet at night. Her coffee mug still sat untouched beside the sink because I couldn't make myself move it yet. Winning doesn't reverse grief. It just proves you were right. And those are two very different things. Still, actions have consequences. So I invited Diane into the garage and laid everything out plain and simple. The HOA would reimburse the stolen wood at full replacement value. They'd pay damages for unlawful removal. All prior citations against my property would be voided permanently. The board would sign a legally binding utility maintenance contract under my oversight, and every resident would contribute to a reserve fund for future infrastructure repairs because frankly the whole system was one bad winter away from collapse anyway. Diane listened quietly while cicadas buzzed outside in the trees. Then she asked, "And if we refuse?" I looked her dead in the eye. "Then you better pray for rain." The county stepped in the next morning. 2 health department trucks rolled into the subdivision around 9 a.m. By noon, bright orange biohazard notices were taped across several lower properties near the shoreline. Local news started sniffing around too. Nothing terrifies an HOA board faster than public embarrassment. Around 3 that afternoon, 3 black SUVs pulled into my driveway one after another. Diane stepped out first, followed by the rest of the board looking like funeral directors at a closed casket service. One guy I recognized from exactly one HOA meeting years earlier walked up carrying a leather folder with both hands like it contained nuclear launch codes. "We're prepared to settle," Diane said. No attitude. No threats. No fake authority. Just defeat. We sat around the same picnic table where Elaine used to shell peas during summer evenings, while Walter Briggs reviewed paperwork line by line. $90,000 up front into a dedicated infrastructure account. $1,200 reimbursement for the cherrywood. Additional damages paid directly to me. Full removal of all outstanding violations. Mandatory board approval required before any future enforcement actions involving my property. And maybe my favorite clause of all, Diane Mercer would resign as HOA president effective immediately and remain barred from board participation for 5 years. That part actually came from the residents, not me. Turns out when people lose functioning toilets for nearly a week, they start re-evaluating leadership decisions pretty quickly. Diane signed last. Her hand shook slightly while she wrote her name. Before leaving, she paused near the porch steps and looked back at me. "You know they'll never forget this." I leaned against the railing and said, "Good." Then after a second I added, "Neither will I." That evening, just before sunset, I walked back through the trees toward the pump house carrying the same flashlight I'd brought 6 days earlier. The air smelled like incoming rain and lake water. Inside, the old control panel sat silent in the dark waiting for somebody to decide the neighborhood had suffered enough. I stood there a minute with my hand on the breaker thinking about Elaine. About how she probably would have hated every second of this mess, while secretly understanding exactly why I did it. Then I flipped the switch. The pumps roared back to life beneath the floor. A deep mechanical hum rolled through the walls, steady and familiar, and somewhere beyond the tree's 43 homes felt water rush through their pipes again, all at once. Faucets sputtered back alive. Toilets flushed. Sprinklers hissed across expensive lawns under the evening sky. Just like that, comfort returned. But something had changed. For them. Maybe it was the realization that power doesn't always belong to the loudest person in the room. Sometimes it belongs to the quiet guy everyone underestimated because he kept to himself and minded his own business until pushed too far. For me, I think it was finally understanding that grief and weakness are not the same thing. Losing Elaine hollowed me out in ways I still can't explain, but it also stripped away my tolerance for disrespect. After you sit beside someone you love in a hospice room, counting their breaths near the end, HOA threats stop feeling very scary. Now every once in a while someone online hears this story and says I went too far. Maybe I did. Shutting off water to an entire neighborhood isn't exactly reasonable behavior. But then again, neither is stealing from a grieving man because you think paperwork makes you untouchable. So you tell me, was I defending myself? Or did grief turn me into the villain of the story? Because honestly, even now, I'm still not completely sure.